Good day, good people. I'm Dr. Johnny Pierce, but you can just call me Johnny. And this is Actually Well. Today, I want to talk about something that is near and dear to me, and I hope is near and dear to you and people that you know of. I want to talk about identity and how do we identify ourselves as people, and what does wellness look like regarding that? Everyone who has ever breathed breath on this planet has been identified in some way. Whether it was somebody who looked upon them at their birth and saw their sex organs and determined that they were a boy or girl, whether it was their skin color that they had highlighted, and in some cases led to a lot of challenges for them going forward, whether it was their academic skills that upon entering school they shined in the classroom or they struggled. It could have been the home that they went to from the hospital if they were born in a hospital. Some people being born at home, like my youngest daughter was. But whatever home that might have been, the neighborhood that could have been, what resources were in that home, what the parents did for a living, or how much they had been inherited from some prior relative. All of these things could shape who you are or who we've been as people. And I think it can go well across the board. I think that if you happen to be born male and you see yourself as male, you ask others to identify you as male, that can go well. If it's female, if it's neither, it can go well. If you happen to be a person of color, if you happen to be someone who happens to be white, if you happen to be a mix of various cultures and colors, then all of that can go well. It's hard probably to imagine it going well for some folks because it hasn't. And I hate that. I hate that because people are who they have had challenges that maybe they wouldn't have had if they were someone else or saw themselves as someone else. I hate that people are encouraged to deny who they are for their safety. I hate that people have to hide who they are so that they don't have to interact with unpleasant government officials. There are so many parts of identity that they just come with so much to them. But as I said, I'm going to do my best today to discuss this in a way where we start with wellness and we build from there. I want to acknowledge the pain that can come from being any particular identity that a person happens to have. I'd like to empower people to think about themselves and identify themselves how they believe best makes sense for them. I don't believe that I get to do that for anybody, and I don't believe that anybody else should be doing that for someone else. I think that this process that we've been going through over the last decade or so, where more and more people are saying, this is who I am, see me for who I am, it makes a lot of sense to me, because what's more personal than the self? And how can one be well if they either aren't feeling like they're being their self, or they don't feel like they can get other people to recognize and acknowledge them as who they are? So, wellness, identity. I'm going to start with me, and I'm going to start with identities that I identify with and how I've kind of built my identity. So, I was born into a family that was Christian. And for quite a while, I went to church on a regular basis, especially when I was a little kid. And I did a pretty good job of doing this. I was a pretty obedient kid, didn't give anybody any issues around this. My grandmother's church had a lot of like song and dance to it before service would start, and I participated in it. I held the little lighter and lit the candles. I, held a cross sometimes and walked out in front of everybody. And then there are other times when I sang in the choir. I did these different things. And my mom found a church that we got started going to, and was very active in that church. And every church I would ever go into, I would just be so clued in on what the pastor was saying and trying to learn about this faith that I thought was just the norm. I thought this was just the way to be. When I was a kid, I really wasn't aware that there were other faith systems out there and didn't think about them very much. Thankfully, I went to churches that were promoting that we should love one another and that it didn't matter what somebody looked like or where they came from or something along those lines. It wasn't necessarily pushing a message of color blindness or, ignorance as much as it was saying that this is a person that deserves love and care simply because they exist. And that shaped how I saw identity from the start. I saw myself as having value because why else would I exist? I saw myself as loved by my mom, by my sister, by my aunt, by my grandmother, and by other people who would come into my life and would try to breathe life into me by encouraging me in different ways. And I know that I'm incredibly fortunate for having that start. I didn't have to have that start. It could have been very different. And I know many people have had a different start. And as a result, this podcast might be very difficult to watch because when you think about who you are and you think about identity, it doesn't bring much forward except pain. I think I can help you with that. And not in a, I'm trying to be your therapist through the screen kind of way, but in a, have you thought about it like this? Are you willing to give this some thought kind of way? Please understand that this podcast is not meant to stand in place of therapy. If you need therapy and you happen to be in the state of Virginia, I'm licensed. I can possibly provide that service. If I can't, I can connect you to someone who can. And if you don't want to go through me at all, I've mentioned it before, Psychology Today. It is a resource that is out there that connects people to therapists, and you can find someone who you feel is a good fit. Typically, people have to post a type of video or have a bio or something along those lines. So I only say all of that to say, if identity is a place of pain for you, or parts of your identity have been places of pain for you, then please don't carry that pain alone and don't feel like it has to define you, because we are not one identity. We have many identities that intersect. So I was going to church and I was doing what I was supposed to do and everything was going fine. And then something miraculous happened, funny enough. I discovered Dragon Ball Z and the NFL. And suddenly Sundays became a bit of a battle in my mother's efforts to get me to go to church. I just didn't want to go anymore. And I started thinking about all the problematic things about church and how people seem to be misbehaving all week long and then coming to church on Sunday and acting like everything was fine. I found it to be highly hypocritical because I heard people in the church being critical of one another. And it didn't seem like we were loving one another the way we were told. And unfortunately, because I was a child at the time, I didn't see the error in my own eye in terms of how I was looking at it, because I was essentially saying, I don't have to practice my faith the way that I've been taught to practice it because I don't see other people practicing it that way. And I'm so thankful that that didn't last very long, but for the time that it was in place, I felt very good about being distant from the church. I still believed in God, never stopped believing in God, but I didn't believe in people. So the very people that I was told to love, I found very difficult to love because I was frustrated with them. And I think when we talk about identity and we talk about health in particular, this is one of the things that's led me to the field, is that I do care a great deal about people and whoever they may be, however they may see themselves. When I was younger, I got frustrated with people because I wanted better for them. I wanted them to have all the opportunities they could possibly have and not see themselves as limited or bound by things like identity, because I didn't see myself as limited or bound by things like identity. Being young, black, boy, Christian, poor, none of these identities seemed to me to have to define me. They were things that I would either have to overcome or in some cases greatly benefit from. I know that's not everybody's perspective, and that may not be yours, but that's how I saw it at the time. It just made sense to me that way. So because I wasn't seeing that in the world that I looked out into, I rejected that. I rejected that that had to be that way. But I then didn't necessarily practice what I felt was truly the case, because it took some time before I came to love people the way I truly do now, in the agape sense. That's the word agape in Greek. Agape love is that I love you independently of myself. It's not about what makes me happy. It's not about what I think is best. Instead, it's about what seemingly is best for you. You being your best self, you achieving your goals. That's how I love my children. That's how I love my friends and my family. That's how I love my clients. And that's the love that I have for everybody. And that is not dependent on their identity as much as the fact that because they are a person, they have value. Because they exist, they are important. So starting with wellness means starting there in my mind, that regardless of your identities, you already are good enough. You already have value. You already should be treated with respect. You already are entitled to certain things. And whether that's something that's shared by everyone around you or not, it is something for you to be willing to fight for. And how you allow others to treat you by checking them when they say the wrong thing and checking them with grace, where it's like, hey, I imagine you were mistaken when you did this thing. And as a result, this is how I would prefer that you do it, because it doesn't have to be aggressive. It doesn't have to be combative. It doesn't even have to be upset. It can simply be that I choose to believe that you were mistaken, that you were ignorant, that you were unaware, but let me give you the information and see what you do with it. See if you make a decision that demonstrates that you are a person who recognizes that my value doesn't come from what you see me as. It comes from the fact that I exist. So I started with me. It's easy to do that because I know the most about me. Next, people that I know well, or I've come to know well through our work, is my clients. And how they identify themselves varies a great deal. I've been working with people in a therapeutic space since 2009. I had my first client back then. Really hope that someday we cross paths again. I don't believe I was a good therapist to that particular client because I had yet to take a therapy class, and all I could offer was support. And while some folks look for that from therapy and think of that as being therapeutic, now that I'm where I am in my career and I've been here for some time now, where I truly do think I help people, support is but a portion of what therapy can provide. But I did the best I can or could working with her. And at the start of her treatment, she was in one situation, and by the end of the treatment, a year later, she was in that same situation all over again. But she felt much better about being there, and she felt pretty good about the work that we did, or at least that's what she told me when it was all said and done. But since that time, I have taken more classes to learn about how to do particular types of therapy. I have been able to work with people from various backgrounds. Some people have been very affluent. Some people have been terribly poor. Some people have been homeless. Some people have been business owners. I think that I can say I've worked with people from almost every background, whether it was a cultural difference, a racial difference, a faith difference. The differences didn't seem to be a barrier to us because of how we approached it. And I think that when it comes to starting with wellness and talking about identity, that's the thing that I want to promote the most, is that differences need not be diminished, erased, downplayed, ignored, minimized, or anything of the sort. In fact, there's so much that we can gain from our differences. The intersectionality of who you are as a person is a complete coming together of differences that you have within yourself. And when we as people interact with one another and we don't allow difference to be a barrier, we see it as an opportunity. We become curious. We look to learn from one another. We truly make the world what it can be, beautiful. So when clients come to me and they have challenges around identity, it could be that because of their gender, they have struggled within their family system because certain things are expected from them because they happen to be that gender. It could be culturally related, that because of their cultural background, what's expected from them as a student is well beyond what the school system itself might be looking for. In some cases, it's been about socioeconomic status, and that because they come from an affluent background, they don't always know what they can do to stand out and be seen as a quality member in the family. The challenges that people face as a result of identity, they are just as diverse as the people themselves. And I actually use that word diverse on purpose because I recently had a chance to do a presentation about diversity, and it was a great experience. I'm really glad I got the opportunity. And one of the things that I highlighted in the presentation was that the word diverse is actually synonymous with the word different. And if we truly embrace diversity the way that we can, we wouldn't just focus on marginalized or non-mainstream or the other people. We wouldn't see diversity as being about that exclusively, because it's not about that exclusively. As a matter of fact, the fact that it's been made to be seen as that exclusively has led to a lot of the nonsense that goes on around topics of diversity, diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI, you've probably heard about it. Well, a lot of the nonsense that goes on about that brings up things like reverse racism and excluding people who would be seen as the mainstream so that people from marginalized groups can get opportunities. And it's just kind of goofy when you really think about it, because there's so many different identities that are being highlighted and looked after by these programs and by the people who run boards focused on that, trying to make sure everyone gets an opportunity. And it is everyone, because everyone is different. And as a result, diversity encompasses everybody. And talking about that in that presentation, it was pretty clear that that's not the way that most people think about diversity. The heart of what I'm trying to get at here is that difference doesn't need to be made out to be inherently bad. And it doesn't have to be made out to be inherently good. But I do kind of look at nature and think about the fact that every snowflake is different. Every blade of grass is different. When you have a healthy, thriving environment, it's because of the diversity of the environment. When you have a properly functioning chain of like creatures living together, it's because of diversity. Sameness doesn't seem to lead to wellness. I think even if you have a diverse group of friends, you'll find that it is more stimulating and interesting. If you have a diverse array of activities that you like to do, that tends to make for a more fulfilling and enriching life. Diversity is the norm. In it being the norm, we can embrace it. And if you don't know how to embrace it, be willing to learn. And please see the diversity within yourself, that you are not one thing. You are not one identity. And you don't have to be made small to fit in someone else's box, because they may not be able to experience you or appreciate you for the full whole person that you are. That might not have been what you thought was going to be a focal point of talking about identity and wellness, but I think it's absolutely crucial to it, because if you cannot for yourself embrace the diversity within you, then it would naturally be a struggle to do so with anybody else. It would be easier to connect with them along something that you see as being really important, but you might in the process want to cut away parts of them because either you're ignorant to what they mean to that person or what to do in those situations. How do I address this person? How do I engage? Be curious, ask. It's okay to ask. You don't have to know. Remember, I'm a forever learner. You can be a forever learner too. There's plenty of things that I've learned about as recently as this year, and this year hasn't even been here that long. I would encourage you, like anybody else, to be willing to ask questions and learn about the people to your left and to your right, the people that you come across in your community, the people that you come across in your day-to-day life. Asking them questions in a genuine way will demonstrate that you're not trying to put them in a bad spot or misunderstand, that you're actually trying to connect with them. And connection and identity go hand in hand. We sometimes gather around groups because we believe that they look like us or they think like us because they come from where we came from. But almost every time we really want to get something done, we all have to come together. We all have to rally around one another. We all have to find a way to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish on the scales we want to accomplish. So, as apprehensive as I've been in my mind in thinking about this and talking about this, I really want to encourage you to do what I had to do today, which is work through those spaces where it maybe felt uncomfortable. Work through the reality that history hasn't always been kind. And believe that if you can find peace within yourself around the various different things about yourself, who you are, what's made you who you are, where you come from, where you're going, all of those things, you may be able to better connect with the next person you come into contact with, or even the people who are already in your life, who you already may feel close to, or at times may feel misunderstood by. Maybe it is all just a misunderstanding, and it's time to start talking about those things that aren't always clear. Be empowered, be encouraged. Just a thought. So I've touched on a lot. I've touched on identity in a way that highlighted that there's numerous aspects of who we are and that they intersect. And in them intersecting, we are well when we are able to come to peace with those different things being what they are. Obviously, other people look at us and they try to tell us who we are. They tell us about ourselves. They tell us who we are through the lens of their own eyes. When we're well, we get a chance to look inside, come to understand what we see. And in some cases, there may be things about what we see we want to change, and there's nothing wrong with that. There may be parts that we don't fully understand, and there's nothing wrong with that either. But when we don't understand something, or we don't necessarily like what we see, or if we love it, we still would need to spend some time determining, what does it look like for this to be well? I happen to be a man. What does it mean to be a healthy man? What does wellness look like as a man? What does it look like at this time in history? What does it look like to be well as a black man? What does it look like being well during Black History Month? I've got a lot of things that I still work out to this day because it's not set in stone. I want to continue to evolve. I want to continue to expand my idea of what wellness looks like with any one of my identities. But finding peace with them and getting comfortable in my own skin has been a lifelong endeavor that brought me a lot of peace. And maybe you have that peace already within yourself, or maybe there's some things that feel unsettled. I want you to embrace and encourage yourself to go ahead and sit with that discomfort, sit with that uneasiness, become more familiar with it, give it some direction. Hey, I identify as this, fill in the blank. What does it mean for me to be well within this identity? How do these identities that I find myself maybe struggling with at times intersect with other ones that I feel really good about? How do I bring it all together? Because I'm a whole person. My value is not contingent on what I produce, how I look, how I identify. My value is tied to the fact that I exist. That's enough. I don't have to earn it. You don't. Some might tell you you do. Some might treat you as though you do. Recognize that as being their challenge, not yours. That sounds easier said than done. I get it. That's actually a book I'm supposed to be writing. I'm working on it. In my head. I'll type it out later. But almost all the things that have value seem to be easier said than done. Now, I will say something that's pretty cool about identifying as I do is that because of my racial background, I think it draws the conversation of things around identity out for others. What does it mean for me to be black? What is it like being black and being from Detroit? It's a little bit different than when I lived in Chicago. I learned that being black in Chicago meant something different than it did when I was at my hometown. What does it mean to be Christian? That doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. And I've learned how to commune and interact with other Christians and learn what does it mean to them. I've used that curiosity that I'm encouraging you to use to close those gaps, because where there are gaps, there's the opportunity to build skills. And the skills that we can build are, how do we respect one another because we have value as people that exist, and at the same time expand one another, because there are things about being who I am, how I've experienced it, that might enrich and enhance your life. And there are things about you being who you are and how you've lived that can enhance mine. And I think that's part of the reason why all of us are here, is to enrich and uplift one another. We've done a good job historically, and I'm talking broadly, of maybe making things harder for one another. We might be pretty adept at that, but we can use that same ability to uplift if we choose to. And that's what I'm attempting to do with this podcast. In many ways, I want to uplift those who decide to look at it. I want to uplift those that I've worked with, anybody that comes into contact with me. I want to give them something to think about that they hadn't thought about that way in the first place or hadn't thought about at all. And in that way, by them spending some time thinking about it, they find that they've enriched their lives. I hope that this podcast, like the ones you've seen already, has enriched your life. You may find that there are some things you still wanted me to touch on or you still want to talk about. Please bring it into the comments section. I want to see more activity in there. I also love to get feedback from you in terms of what do you find to be places where you're well in terms of your identity? Where are places you might struggle? I think starting community around conversation around that topic is in itself another way for us to be curious and connect. But to bring this one to a close, I hope that you come to see that differences are not inherently good or bad, they just are. That doesn't require you to be colorblind. That doesn't require you to ignore someone's history. That doesn't require you to ignore history itself. It means that I have to look at that history and understand how it may fall on the person who's sitting in front of me. Being open to hearing that it falls on them differently than I might imagine, because I might be projecting onto them ideas I have about who they are instead of asking. Being curious about, well, who are you? And how did you come to feel the way you feel, experience things the way you experienced it? Sometimes people are going to have answers to those questions, and that's okay. They don't need to. But I'd love to learn as much as I can about those experiences because I really think it would give me a better understanding of how to interact with the person that's sitting in front of me. How do I treat them well? Remember to click like, subscribe, share this if you can, comment if you can. This is actually well, and I want you to be well.